Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars on it is a miserable and muggy Florida September morning. September comes along, it's one of the burr months. You think maybe it's going to start easing up a little bit, but it really hasn't. It's still this misty, moist fog of crap that just absolutely envelops you from the moment the sun comes up. It probably burns off a little bit just in time for the tropical sun to burn you to an absolute cinder if you're unlucky enough to step outside. So it's just once again proving to me that I have to get the hell out of Naples in the summer, and that is the plan. Next year it's going to be totally different. Forgive me, it's been a while since I've done a video. I realize this, despite all my promises, and it's not really for lack of trying. It's just that cars have to come along that make me want to do it, and I can't force it. And then finally this one came along, and it's a bit of a slam dunk, so I'm really happy to be going on it. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to come up with more. I traveled to do that Audi 5000 video that we did a couple weeks ago, and that was kind of an experiment. And I think despite it working out, I haven't pursued it farther, which is just typical of where I'm at. But, maybe when the season breaks and the weather gets a little bit cooler, my inspiration will change. I can only hope so. It's been pretty quiet with animals. You can hear some birds around us, but the goats are long gone. They're a distant memory. I haven't seen any dogs lately. There's just been nothing. Other than my lady friend decided to get a bird feeder. I mean, you want to talk like a stab directly into my heart. I mean, of all things in the world, pet turtles would have been preferable. A bird feeder. And I mean, it's not like a couple of cute little cardinals are floating by to peck at it every once in a while. It is a Hitchcockian melee of avian fury. They eat a pound of feed. There's like dozens and dozens of angry, pissed off birds. Every time I walk outside, they all flutter away, but I know they're up in the branches just waiting to come back, thinking, oh, the bird feed's good, but I bet I could peck his eyes out, and that would be a lot better. And I just sit there in absolute terror, and I can't. She bought two of them. One out front hangs from a tree, and then there's one in the back that she's suction cupped on the window, which the birds don't want, apparently, because they fly in, they sit on the thing, they look inside and think, oh God, these people are screwed up, and then they fly off. So that one isn't very popular, but the other one, it's just an absolute nightmare, and it's typical, that I have to put up with this sort of thing. Nobody really respects my issues, and, if I am somewhat of an avian phobe, I think I have good reason for it. That said, Dalton, very quickly, he's departed for greener pastures. Honestly, if he hadn't left, he probably would have been canned. I realized the guy didn't sweat. I mean, I detailed a couple of cars after he left, and it looked like I jumped in a swimming pool. I mean, I would look at him halfway through the day. He's dry as a bone. And, he comes in late, he's eating a cheese Danish the size of Tennessee. He's not thin. Lunch, he's got a bunch of these McDonald's burgers and some McFlurries and whatnot. So it's not like he's some fit triathlon guy who, doesn't sweat. He should have been sweating like I was, and he wasn't, which just told me how, crappy a job he was doing on these cars. He ended up he's working for some screen enclosure place now, putting screens together. And after that, apparently he met some guy while playing a video game online that restores tanks for a tank museum in Italy. And after his court case is all, cleared up, he's going to be going off to do that. So yeah, that is something that I definitely see happening. I've been discussing all that over on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called now. I've decided that's a pretty good platform to interact with anybody, God help you, who's interested enough to, talk about curious car stuff. And this week I'm actually going to give away some merch. I mean, I know that's a thing that people do. I end up with merchandise because I have helpful friends who say, oh my God, you got to sell hats and shit. Let me make them up for you, which Penelope made some up. Now my good friend Sean, who inflicts his child on me from time to time, has come up with some merchandise. And I just... I don't know. I'm not really that guy. So I ended up with this stuff, and what I'm going to do with it is just give it away. And if you go over to Twitter, Curious Cars on Twitter, and sign up for it, I don't know exactly. I might have just my nephew pick some people at random. Anyone who posts stuff, I may have him go through and pick something because, then it's him, and I'm detached from it. And we do have some cool stuff. Like, let me show you this. This is kind of the highlight of it all. I've got a bunch of hats I'm going to give away and some mugs, but this mug is probably the most... Yeah, well, there it is. Imagine, and again, you walk in every day to work, and you have that looking at you. That's what's looking at you. And, I have to hand it to Sean. He's come up with some pretty cool stuff. So we're going to give this mug away and some others. And anyway, so get over to Twitter and sign up, or X, or whatever the hell it is, if you want to end up with some kind of merchandise. And the hell with that. We're going to jump and leap directly into this car. It's a 1962 Ford Thunderbird, and this one happens to be a sports roadster, which is a very, very cool piece, I have to say, sport roadster, whatever you want to call it. And we'll get into what makes that different from most other of the Thunderbirds of this vintage. And it's the third generation Thunderbird. It was Ford's personal luxury car. They basically invented that segment with the first Thunderbird, and it would be a continuing success for them for many years, even to the point that they kind of wanted to distance Thunderbird from Ford and kind of make it its own mark, Thunderbird. They would minimize the Ford placement on the car, which, that didn't work out. Then they ended up doing that with Lincoln later on, the Continentals and stuff. But the overly famous, and I say that because it is a bit overblown, first-gen Thunderbird was made to compete with the Corvette. And that it did. It did it very, very well. In fact, while the Corvette went for being a sports car, Ford decided to go more for personal luxury, and that was a wise choice, at least when it came to sales. It sold extremely well. It was a two-seat roadster, removable hardtop, pretty cool thing. And then they immediately replaced it in '58 with a big square four-seat thing that, didn't really look anything like the first gen, but apparently people liked it because it sold well. And even if I think that one was a little bit awkward, America didn't, and they enjoyed it. But things were moving very quickly in the country, and they needed to update it for 1961, which they did with this car, which was an all-new model from top to bottom. Underneath, sheet metal, all of it. And it was meant to reflect the times. It was much sleeker and more streamlined than the prior models. A guy named George Walker, he was Ford's vice president of styling at the time, said that because this is an age of aerodynamics, high speeds, and rockets, we must keep in tune with the times. So very true words. And that's what they did. I mean, this thing looked like it was sitting on the launch pad at NASA. I mean, when it came out, people were just absolutely blown away by it. It was optimistic. It was an optimistic time in America, and car styling and car choices had to reflect that. For instance, Ford offered 19 different colors for this car. What they called a diamond luster exterior color. 19 different choices. 30 if you got into two-tones. And the luxury lounge. I mean, you just have to love cars in this era. The luxury lounge interior came in 18 different upholstery choices. And, you see what you get now. Go to Ford or Chevy. Have a look at what, one of the Explorers or, any of the cars they're offering. See how many different colors you can get inside and out. I don't think you're going to end up with a third of what was offered on this thing. And again, that was it's such a neat time in car and American history where everything came together in such a way that you'll never see it again. There will never again be a time when cars are built to this level of visual impact and styling and, so much put into the way a car appeared versus just, how it can be made cheaply and pumped out and squeezed out for maximum dollars. This was a very, very different world, and you can feel it in every facet of this car. It did retain some of the traditional T-Bird stuff. The hood scoop, that was kind of a T-Bird thing that had made it through first and second gens. They kept going with it. It also had sort of a sloped nose, the hood sloping down at the front. That was very much, a true T-Bird thing. But otherwise, it was all new and really a full-fledged product of the oncoming jet and space age. It paced the Indy 500 in '61. It had that kind of impact that people wanted to see it. And it was featured prominently in JFK's inaugural campaign. I think McNamara came from Ford. He was the SecDef at the time, and maybe that had something to do with it. But otherwise, Thunderbird convertibles were all over the JFK campaign. But look, let's get more into this particular one. And I say that because we got a lot to cover and I don't need to do a 2-hour video here. But T-Birds in '62 were prolific. To the tune of over 78,000. Not quite as many convertibles, quite a few coupes. They had that Landau coupe, which came out. Very formal roofline that had that scissoring looking thing on the side. And that became a T-Bird feature for the next 25 years or so. But otherwise, they made a bunch of these things, and they sold well. But a guy named Lee Iacocca wanted to do one that was kind of special, so he came up with what was called the Sport Roadster. And it turned out in '62, for instance, only 1,427 of them were built. Again, against 78,000 overall Thunderbirds. So you're talking about a pretty rare piece. One of the reasons for that was it was expensive, and even if it was kind of cool, it's pretty friggin' impractical. And I can understand why a bunch of Americans would have just said, "Hey, give me the convertible, but leave the Sport Roadster stuff off." It just of those 1,427, only 120 had what was called the M code engine, which was a tri-power, and that. Those things are stratospherically valuable now. They gave it an extra 40 horse, and again, only about 120 of those things are around. Again, the Sport Roadster itself, even without that engine, is also incredibly rare. And while this one, because it's a later one, is easy to determine that it's real, the earlier ones had the same body codes and VIN codes as the convertibles, and a lot of those ended up as fakes, so you have to keep an eye out. This one is actually authentic, and I'm going to be selling it, by the way, on Bring a Trailer for the very nice guy who let me borrow it for this video. So I'm not going to use this video, I don't think, because Bring a Trailer frowns on me talking about whiskey and prostitutes and whatnot, so I have to do one that's maybe a little more muted for them, but we'll see. But anyway, so this is a later '62, and that does make the authenticity a little bit easier. It has an 89 in the VIN, and it's stamped with 76B on the data plate, which you'd see in the photos, and that gives it away. Earlier ones, they just didn't have that, and that's why you see fakes. But there are a few ways to tell. For one, it had these special badges up here on the front fender. You see underneath the Thunderbird, the red, white, and blue badge with the wings. That was also matched on the tonneau cover between the seats. And the tonneau cover itself is also the Sport Roadster signature feature. I mean, that is this thing that was bolted on. You could buy them, by the way. That's why the fakes were out there. But this one came factory. Hid the rear seats. Made it look like a crazy, swoopy, Batman-esque two-seat Roadster. And it just looks pretty damn cool. They figure since the guy's going to be riding it a little bit crazy, too, they wanted to give the passenger an oh shit handle. And there you see that bar, where the glove box would be, so the passenger could grab on. And that is another distinguishing feature. You also won't see fender skirts because it had these Kelsey Hayes wire wheels with sort of a simulated nut spin-off thing on the end, and they fit in such a way that skirts wouldn't fit over them. So the Sport Roadsters did not have fender skirts at the back, and that is one of the ways you tell. So it's cool to have this car, and I'm thrilled. And there's actually an interesting story about Elvis Presley crashing a Sports Roadster because the Kelsey Hayes wheels, the wires, they failed. Oh shit, now I've stepped in ants, they're attacking me, and I've got to pause. Yeah, that's fantastic. Singularly the most lethal animals in Southwest Florida, and of course Peter's got them all over the driveway. But anyway, so Elvis almost crashed one of these things because one of the wire wheels failed, and Ford and Kelsey Hayes recalled him to strengthen him up a little bit. And that's, killing Elvis is not really a good selling point. That wouldn't have helped very well at all. Also, Perry Mason, by the way, it was actually his detective, I think, Drake, or whatever the hell his name was, drove a 62 convertible, and I think Perry drove it sometimes with Della Street looking all hot and sexy in the passenger seat, and I presume that also didn't hurt sales at all, seeing that on television. And, speaking of that, let's have a quick look at the year 1962 and see what was going on when this car was new and roaming the boulevards and, in an oh, God, there's another ant killing me, jeez. Anyway, 1962, John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit the Earth in February. It was a pretty big deal. People could see the Earth from the lens of, the capsule for the first time, and it had to have a tremendous psychological impact on the country and, probably the whole world. There was also the Cuban Missile Crisis, which detracts a little bit from the optimism, and that's when Soviets parked a bunch of nuclear warheads, or wanted to, in Cuba, again, 90 miles from mainland, United States, and that just set off this big, giant escalation towards, the brink of World War, which, finally the Soviets blinked and things went fine, but, that was kind of a scary moment. You also had Marilyn Monroe serenading JFK. That was probably new to the people in America at the time, seeing this sort of degeneracy on television. And she actually died several months later of an overdose. Conspiracy theorists have to wonder. Spider-Man made his debut in comics for the first time before becoming an absolute horror of a thing that's still used today. And okay, so the average cost of a new house, $12,500. And I mean, that's average. You went to some backwater Ohio place, you'd get it for $3,000. I mean, it was just a very, very different world. The average new car cost $3,000. This one, the Sport Roadster version, was the most expensive. You're probably looking up near $5,000. But the Thunderbird was basically a highline luxury car at the time, and you just couldn't compare it. You could get, probably a Chevy Biscayne for $3,000. That was a pretty good car. Gas, by the way, was 28 cents a gallon, so no worries about the big V8 under the hood. In entertainment, you had the Beatles. They released, I think they were turned down by Decca Records, and then went elsewhere and came out with Love Me Do, and it turned out that they were a pretty big success, so Decca was probably annoyed over that. Johnny Carson took over The Tonight Show, and you could find Perry Mason, the Beverly Hillbillies, and Dick Van Dyke on TV. In the movies, you had Spartacus, nice gay imagery for, the early 60s. You had To Kill a Mockingbird and Lawrence of Arabia. So that was what was going on when people were driving these things new around the streets and, feeling optimistic and breaking out their slide rulers and getting ready to design Saturn V rockets and going to the country club and, drowning their secretary after a night of drinking or whatever the hell it is people did in the 60s. So I'm going to take a break there, get my breath together, have another little stab of coronavirus whiskey because I hear that's coming back, and we'll continue here in just one moment, so bear with me. Alright, so let's get into the styling of this car, which is what absolutely makes it. I mean, what a beautiful, beautiful product of the times. It's all space age. I mean, look at the swoopy lines of this thing. It looks like a science fiction rocket from the 50s, which is, of course, the plan. I mean, that's what it's designed to be, is give you that impression. And it's just all these swooping body lines. There's an extensive use of chrome, but at the same time, it feels integrated and nice. You've got this sort of swept-under grille. It's got some horizontal lines with these shiny little drawer pulls, they call them, and a little overrider at the bottom, which just looks cool. These lights that are sort of sunk into the hood, quad lights up front, looking very neat. The ovals around them with the the trim going into the hood, the Thunderbird logo, which was, by the way, it came Ford advertising exec in the 50s came up with Thunderbird. He had offered $250, or Ford did, or a fancy suit if anyone could come up with a better name, and no one did. It was going to be the Hawaiian or the Tropical, but I think Thunderbird worked out a hell of a lot better, and there it is. But, it's just a gorgeous car. Love the swooping hood, very flat with the exception of that scoop with the angled V in the front. A beautiful chrome body line that runs at the top, blending in. It becomes the muted tail fins at the back. The way they've integrated the door handles into that chrome trim is very cool with the push button. The back of this thing was compared, I don't know, favorably or unfavorably to an aircraft carrier. I mean, the length of it is absolutely insane with the tonneau cover on. It just goes and goes and goes. And, this kind of wasted real estate is just not something you're ever going to see from a car manufacturer today, and it's wonderful. They changed the side trim repeatedly. That's how you could distinguish between years. In the back, they've got these 3 sort of simulated vents that lead into a chrome impact strip down the side, and those Kelsey Hayes wires with the white walls are just absolutely stunning. You see the downturned dual exhaust tips. The rocket taillights are clearly the most distinguishing features. Absolutely beautiful. Weird little gas door in the middle that flips up to the it's hard to do one-handed. Well, there you go. Flips up to the left. Kind of strange. But again, those rocket taillights are just absolutely gorgeous. And the way they kind of go into the bumper, and at night, the way they reflect and twinkle, it's just kind of magical. Again, those swoopy Batman, rear seat humps. Very, very cool. Love that this one has a spotlight. I think that's one of the neatest features of 50s and early 60s car. The reason being, a lot of towns were, they didn't have street lights. They didn't have reflective numbers, so you had to use that thing. Cops, of course, used it to see what was going on, but people driving around in strange towns could look at street signs and mailboxes and house numbers, and I guess your 50s delivery guy for a pizza company probably had a tough time of things. Love the chrome surround windshield. Love the suicide wipers. It's kind of a flat windshield, side vents. Very, very cool. I'm going to pause here and put in, it was all offered without comment because it's for Bring a Trailer, but it's the operation at the top, and it's too much of a pain in the ass to do again. But when I open up the top, you're going to see how there's absolutely crap for trunk space. There is no trunk that you open up on this thing. In fact, I'll just do it for a second just so you can see. But I mean, this is how you get in the trunk in this car. Well, first of all, you have to have the key car on, but... So it's going to lift up. So, I mean, you go to the grocery store, hopefully with the top up, because you have to raise it this way, and that's where you put your groceries in the back. And, I guess you do have a little bit of room back there behind it where you can put shit. But otherwise, trunk space is at an absolute minimum on this car. And I guess that's why a lot of people ended up buying the coupes. It just made a lot more practical sense. So, you get that back down. So kind of an interesting space-age way to get at your trunk. And we'll have a look under the hood. And basically there was one engine in this thing in '62 that you could get, which was a pretty decent engine, by the way. And if I can open this up, we'll have a look at it. For some reason this was easier. Oh, okay, there we go. Got the scars beautifully restored. Yeah, I mean, look at that. That is stunning. But anyway, it's an FE engine, 390 cubic inch, 300 horsepower. If you opted for the M code, the tri-power setup, you'd have 340 horsepower. This was bolted to a Ford Cruise-O-Matic 3-speed automatic. Again, the only transmission choice. And it was a bit of a technological marvel. I mean, it's basically unibody construction where the body and the frame were welded rather than bolted together. And in fact, there's a big section where it joins up right at the cowling. And that was a selling feature. And the hood was wider than the earlier Mustangs, Thunderbirds. The fenders were narrower. And they now bolted on, which was a lot easier for body work and that sort of thing. So that was, again, part of the selling feature. The brakes, four-wheel drums, they came under a lot of scrutiny at the time, particularly in the Sport Roadster, because they produced fade and didn't stop very well. It wouldn't be discs for a few more years, which the car really needed. But anyway, at this point in time, you got the power drum brakes, and he had A-arms up front with, big springs. You had a live axle in the back with leaf springs, and, very traditional sort of setup for a 60s car, and did actually handle very well for the time and had plenty of pep and plenty of power, but it was heavy and not really a sports car. So, again, very different direction from the way that the Corvette went. And actually, for the first time, a Thunderbird hood was hinged at the rear. The prior two gens all opened at the front, or opened at the back and tilted forward. So this was much more, traditional kind of stuff. And anyway, so look, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to get my crap inside, and then we're going to end up going for a spin. But God, have a look in there. This was restored by a local older German guy, and you can tell. I mean, the amount of detail work that went into that is fantastic, and it's just nice to see. Anyway, I'm going to pause there, get my crap in, we'll go for a spin. Alright, so let's hop in and see what we got. The interior of this car was all new, and here was one of the neatest features conceivable. It had a swing-away steering wheel. When the car was off and in park, you could swing that wheel 10 inches to the right to make getting in and out a lot easier. And honestly, fat old smoking whiskey guys like me, if that doesn't inspire love for a car, I just don't know what does. That's absolutely fantastic. Just absolutely love it. The door panel, you can see very nice. The sun is killing everything, but beautifully designed, kind of, all stuff that's unnecessary by today's standards, which makes it just absolutely fantastic. There's your row of switches for the windows, the power locks, and the top. Nice stuff. You've got a little smoker's vent window there. You see it's got a power seat. The up and down adjustment was disabled from the factory on Sport Roadsters so that it wouldn't interfere with that top, which I think is all, neat stuff. Basically, all they did was pull one of the wires and tape it to the seat. So, different world back then. And if you look forward here, you can see there's the back seat sort of hidden underneath that tonneau cover. I'm going to try to get pictures of that later, of the back seats themselves, but that gave the illusion of being this sort of two-seat roadster car. And here's that VIN and data plate, which can identify that this is a authentic sports roadster. Anyway, let's fire it up. There down, you see the pedals, power brakes. That was actually standard feature on this car, as was a lot of stuff, which is what made it expensive. Ford just went ahead and included a bunch of stuff that were options on most cars in this car, and that's one of the reasons it ended up being pricey. Thing fires right to life. It's shockingly quiet, and that is actually by design. But once you put it in drive, you can no longer move the steering shaft. But let's pull up out of the sun so get a better look at this. Alright, so there you see the instruments, the gauges, all very cool, beautiful looking, chrome surround. You got your fuel, you got your temp, you got your 120 mile an hour speedo, and you got your clock. Here you've got your lights and your wipers. Down here, I don't actually have any idea what that is. Vent of some sort. I should have looked more into that. The guy who owned this put in kind of this cool little aftermarket radio that comes with the original, but this one was designed to fit and look natural and be more modern. It also has air conditioning, which works with these controls. I love this finned aluminum looking insert in the swoopy dash into center console area. You've got an ashtray because of course people smoked then, and without a glove box over there you had to have a glove box here, and there you can see the owner's manual and some other crap. Dalton is going to be our co-pilot today, so I'm going to stick him over there in the passenger seat. And again, this sort of oh shit grab handle that was particular to the Sport Roadsters. The day-night mirror, cool. It was another new idea to actually glue that to the windshield. That really hadn't been done before until this car, and that was a bit of a pioneering thing. You also had a tremendous amount of sound deadening used to keep the car quiet, which it is, and I mean, it still holds true today. I was shocked when I hopped in this thing how much quieter it is than, you know, comparative cars of the vintage. It just, you know, it's kind of the Lexus of its age. You could barely hear the thing running. That said, let's go for a spin, see if we can't get Peter's gate to open here. Yep, there we go. You've got this tremendous vista. I love the knife edge fenders on the left and the right with the chrome trim on top, the power bulge hood scoop in the middle. Just looks really cool. The suicide wipers. Up here you've got the, you know, the color-coded sun visors. It's just such a neat car. I tell you what, we're going to be driving into the sun. And before you get on me, I didn't do the windshield in this one. I haven't touched it since I picked it up. So I'm going to pause and wait till we turn right so you're not blasted by the sun. Away we go. The power steering, also another standard feature, optional on other cars. You know, the thing just came extremely well equipped and goes down the road beautifully. Quiet, very light effort on the steering wheel, tremendously fun to drive, incredible amount of pep. I mean, again, you're not going to break any land speed records, but it gets up and goes. I mean, I was barely at quarter throttle there, if that, and just effortless, you know, move into traffic. You know, what can I tell you? I mean, what a terrific boulevard cruiser. What a great classic car. What an easy and fun thing to own and drive around and have a bit of fun with readily available parts. There are plenty of them out there. Lots of stuff, lots of support. Just a tremendous fun way to have a collector car without too much stress and effort. I mean, you know, way different than you end up with a Lancia Delta or something. You're gonna have a lot more work keeping it going. But this thing, you know, tremendous impact. People wave at you. It's a lot of fun to drive around. Top down, the AC works great. You know, again, without the big sales pitch, it just is a fun and rewarding classic car to own and feels modern enough to drive around in traffic, you know, without worries that you're gonna, you know, have to brake the day before you start, or, you know, the thing's gonna overheat. It just has a nice, reliable vibe to it, which is part of why the car sold so well in the beginning. They had a nice, quiet, reliable vibe to them, and people like that. And you can feel that this is a true luxury car. So I'm gonna shut up and drive for a minute so you can feel that. Might try to do an interstate run, as silly as that is, and otherwise I'll, you know, keep going, try and come up with some more fun stuff, and we will see you with the next one. Take care.